Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Stay tuned to find out what happens next. Will Mark regret his decision, or will he discover that sometimes the most unlikely agreements lead to life-changing transformations? Let us know what you think in the comments below. Mark arrived home that evening, the weight of the decision heavy on his shoulders. He barely noticed the rain as it soaked through his jacket. His mind was spinning. Eleanor Brooks, the older woman with silver hair and piercing blue eyes, had presented an offer he couldn't refuse. The idea of marrying a stranger for financial security felt wrong, but what choice did he have? His mother's medical bills, his father's debts, his own future, everything depended on this one decision. He tossed his bag onto the couch and collapsed into the armchair, running his hands through his hair. The sound of his phone vibrating on the table broke his thoughts. It was a text from Eleanor. "I've made the arrangements. Tomorrow morning, meet me at my estate. We'll finalize everything." Mark stared at the message, his stomach tightening. He had agreed to the contract, but now it was becoming real. Tomorrow, he would marry a woman he hardly knew, all for a deal that promised to save his family. His heart was still racing as he pulled himself up from the chair. The next day, he found himself in a sleek black car, heading towards Eleanor's estate. The mansion loomed ahead, surrounded by tall gates and perfectly manicured gardens. It was nothing like the small apartment he shared with his mother, the dingy building they could barely afford. He had been to fancy places before, but this was something else entirely. The car pulled up to the front of the house, and the door swung open before he even had a chance to step out. Eleanor was standing there, waiting for him, dressed in an elegant black dress that hugged her figure perfectly. "Mark," she said with a soft smile. "I trust your night was restful?" Mark nodded, trying to hide his nervousness. "It was fine," he replied, though his heart was pounding. She led him inside, where the grand interior of the mansion took his breath away. High ceilings, chandeliers, and large windows that looked out onto the expansive lawn. It was a world so far removed from his own that he almost felt like an intruder. "Let's get started, shall we?" Eleanor said, guiding him into a sitting room. The lawyer was already there, waiting with the paperwork. Mark felt a wave of unease wash over him as he sat down at the large mahogany table. Eleanor handed him a glass of wine, and for a moment, the two of them sat in silence, the gravity of the situation settling in. "This is not going to be easy," she said, breaking the silence. "But I'm sure you understand what's at stake." Mark nodded, taking a sip of the wine. He had heard about Eleanor Brooks before, the powerful CEO, the woman who had built an empire. But sitting in her home, watching her carefully sign the documents that would bind them together, it all felt surreal. He had never imagined his life would come to this. "I understand," he replied, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside. The lawyer began to explain the details of the contract. It was straightforward enough. They would marry in a private ceremony, with no expectations of love or intimacy. Their relationship would be strictly professional, designed to benefit both of them. Eleanor would help him with his financial troubles, and in return, he would help her with the public image she had carefully crafted. But as the lawyer spoke, Mark couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding. How long would this arrangement last? What if something changed? He wasn't sure, but he knew one thing for certain: this would be the most important decision of his life. The next few hours were a blur of paperwork, legal jargon, and agreements that felt like they were happening to someone else. When everything was finally signed, Eleanor stood up and extended her hand to him. "Welcome to your new life, Mr. Davis," she said, her voice cool but not unkind. Mark shook her hand, the finality of the gesture sinking in. He had agreed to marry her, and now there was no turning back. The weight of the contract felt heavier now that it was signed. But as he looked into Eleanor's eyes, he couldn't help but wonder, was this really just a business deal, or was there something more behind her calm, calculated exterior? Stay tuned to find out what happens next. Will Mark stick to his original plan, or will the lines between business and love begin to blur? Let us know what you think in the comments below. The days that followed felt like a blur for Mark. He had entered a world so foreign to him, one that was both alluring and cold. Eleanor's mansion, once a symbol of overwhelming wealth, now felt like a gilded cage. He moved in, and while the spacious rooms and lavish decor were impressive, they only served as reminders of how far apart their worlds truly were. Mark had signed the contract, agreeing to live as her husband in name only, but he was beginning to question his decision more and more as the days passed. Eleanor remained a mystery, always poised and composed, never showing any signs of vulnerability. She was kind enough, but her kindness always felt calculated. They had not yet shared any real moments together. Their interactions were brief, polite, and businesslike, just as their contract had outlined. She would invite him to the occasional gala or business event, always by her side in the most formal of settings, but they never spent time alone outside of these appearances. Mark had expected this, of course this was a business arrangement after all, but part of him couldn't help but wonder if Eleanor had always been this cold. As time passed, something unexpected started to happen. Mark found himself becoming more drawn to her. It wasn't love, not yet, but he couldn't deny the strange pull he felt whenever she was near. Her intelligence, the way she commanded attention in a room, the way she seemed to know exactly what to say and when, it was captivating. He wasn't sure how he had ended up in this situation, but he couldn't help but respect her. One evening, after a particularly grueling week of work, Eleanor invited him to dinner in the mansion's private dining room. It was just the two of them. The atmosphere was far less formal than their usual meetings, and for a moment, Mark felt a glimmer of hope that this evening might be different. Eleanor sat across from him, her face softened by the dim candlelight. "How have you been adjusting?" she asked, her voice calm and measured. Mark put down his fork, studying her for a moment. It was the first time she had asked him anything personal. "I'm managing," he said, though his voice held a note of uncertainty. "It's just, everything's so different here. I don't know if I'll ever get used to it." She nodded, as if she had expected this answer. "I understand," she replied, her eyes meeting his. "It's a lot to take in. But you're doing fine." There was a pause, and for the first time since he had moved in, Mark felt the walls between them begin to crack. "Eleanor," he began, his voice hesitant, "why did you really ask me to marry you?" She looked at him, her expression unreadable for a moment. "I told you," she said softly, "it was a business arrangement. There's no need for anything more." Mark's gaze lingered on her. He could tell there was something more to her story, something she was not saying. But he knew pushing her would get him nowhere. Instead, he chose to change the subject. "So, what's next for you?" "Your company, I mean." Eleanor's eyes seemed to brighten a little at the mention of her work. "We're expanding internationally," she said, her voice gaining energy. "There's a lot of work to do, but I'm excited about the future. It's been a long time since I've had someone I can rely on to help with the day-to-day operations." Mark nodded, intrigued by the passion she showed when talking about her business. For the first time, he felt a sense of respect for her, not just as a woman of wealth, but as a person driven by ambition. But as the night wore on, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. The arrangement they had made was supposed to be simply no emotions, no complications, but Mark was starting to realize how difficult it was to keep his feelings at bay. The more time he spent with Eleanor, the more confused he became about the boundaries of their relationship. He wasn't sure if he was falling for her or if he was just falling into the role she had assigned him. And yet, as he looked across the table at her, he couldn't help but wonder if there was more to their arrangement than either of them had anticipated. What happens next? Will Mark be able to navigate his growing feelings for Eleanor, or will the line between business and love become impossible to cross? Stay tuned and let us know your thoughts in the comments below. As the days passed, Mark found himself spending more time at Eleanor's estate, though he couldn't shake the feeling that something was changing between them. Their interactions remained cordial and formal, yet there were moments, fleeting but undeniable, where the walls they had built began to crack. Eleanor, though always composed, seemed to soften a bit in his presence. She would sometimes ask about his day or make small talk over dinner, things that felt more personal than anything they had agreed upon. Mark tried to keep his distance, reminding himself that this was a business arrangement, nothing more. But every time she looked at him with those piercing eyes, he felt something stir within him, a sense of connection that he didn't know how to handle. One evening, they found themselves alone again in the vast dining room. The grand chandelier above cast a soft glow over the table, and Eleanor was once again dressed in a way that seemed effortless but elegant. As Mark took his seat, he couldn't help but notice the way the soft light danced across her features, making her appear both distant and approachable at the same time. "Mark," Eleanor said, her voice breaking the silence, "I know this arrangement isn't easy for you. But I want you to know that I appreciate your willingness to go through with it." Mark looked up at her, surprised by the sincerity in her voice. "It's not what I expected," he admitted, his hands fidgeting with his napkin. "I never thought I'd be living like this." She smiled slightly, her expression softening. "No one ever expects to be in this position. But sometimes, we have to make hard choices." The conversation hung in the air between them, neither of them saying anything for a moment. Mark felt a wave of uncertainty wash over him. Was he really just a pawn in this arrangement? Was he here because she truly needed him, or was it simply business? He wanted to ask her, wanted to know the truth, but something in his gut told him he wasn't ready for the answer. Eleanor cleared her throat, her gaze shifting away from him. "You've been doing well here. I think you're adapting better than you realize," she said, her voice calm but firm. Mark nodded, unsure of what to say. He was adapting, but he couldn't escape the nagging feeling that he was losing himself in this strange new world. "I've been thinking," Eleanor continued, her eyes meeting his again. "Maybe it's time we stop pretending." Mark's heart skipped a beat at her words. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. She leaned forward slightly, her gaze steady. "You're not just a business partner to me anymore, Mark. I know we agreed that this would be an arrangement, but I want you to understand that I'm not treating you like one." Mark felt his breath catch in his throat. Was this what he had been waiting for? Was she about to tell him that she saw him as more than just a contract? But before he could respond, Eleanor stood up, her movements graceful as always. "I need some time to think," she said, turning away from him. "We'll talk later." And just like that, the moment was over. Mark sat there, stunned, trying to process what had just happened. He had always known that this marriage of convenience could turn into something more, but hearing it from Eleanor's lips made it all feel too real. Was she starting to see him differently? Or was this just another calculated move in a game he didn't fully understand? The next few days passed in a blur, with Eleanor pulling back slightly. She became more distant again, as if she had never said those words. Mark tried to focus on his work, but his thoughts kept drifting back to that conversation. What did it mean? Was it a step towards something more? Or was she just confused, like he was? Then, one night, Mark was sitting alone in the library, scrolling through his phone when Eleanor appeared in the doorway. She was dressed casually for once, her usual elegance replaced with something softer, more approachable. "Mark," she said, her voice quiet. "I've been thinking a lot about what I said." He looked up at her, his heart pounding. "And? I want you to know," she began, pausing as if gathering her thoughts, "that I wasn't lying. I don't expect this to be just business anymore. But I need time to figure out what this is between us." Mark stood up, taking a step toward her. "I think I understand," he said softly. "We'll figure this out together, whatever it is." Eleanor nodded, a small smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "Thank you, Mark. For the first time since their arrangement began, he felt like they were no longer just two people bound by a contract. They were something else, something undefined, but with the potential to grow. What happens next? Will Mark and Eleanor finally break down the walls between them, or will the weight of their contract continue to keep them apart? Stay tuned and let us know your thoughts in the comments below. The following days felt like a delicate balancing act for Mark. Eleanor's words still echoed in his mind. I don't expect this to be just business anymore. He hadn't known what to make of them, but the distance she had put between them after that conversation made him wonder if she had meant them at all. It wasn't until one rainy evening, when Mark was working late in his small office off the mansion's grand hallway, that he finally saw Eleanor again. She knocked softly on the door before stepping in, looking more relaxed than she had in weeks. For once, she wasn't dressed in the typical formal attire. Her usual high heels were replaced with a pair of comfortable flats, and her hair was tied loosely back. Mind if I come in? She asked, her voice surprisingly gentle. Mark glanced up from his laptop, momentarily caught off guard by her unexpected appearance. He nodded, clearing a space on the desk for her to sit. Of course. What's going on? Eleanor hesitated for a moment, then took a seat across from him. There was a pause, an almost uncertain silence, before she spoke again. I've been thinking a lot about us, Mark. About what we've agreed upon, and about what we really want out of this. Mark's heart began to race again. Was she finally ready to have the conversation they had both been avoiding? You don't have to say anything if you're not ready, he said, his voice soft. But I think we need to talk about where this is going. Eleanor's eyes met his, and for the first time, Mark saw something in her eyes that wasn't the calm, controlled exterior he had come to expect. There was a flicker of something deeper, vulnerability, maybe? She took a deep breath before continuing. I don't want this to be just an arrangement anymore. I've realized that I'm not going through the motions for the sake of business. And I know that might sound confusing, but I can't pretend that I don't care. Mark felt the weight of her words sink in, his mind racing. What are you saying, Eleanor? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. She shifted slightly in her chair, her hands clasped tightly together. I'm saying that I want to see where this goes. I want to see if this could be something more than just two people bound by a contract. There was a quiet intensity in her voice that made Mark's chest tighten. He had known from the beginning that this was never supposed to be about love, but hearing her speak with such honesty made him wonder if he had been lying to himself all along. But we agreed, Mark said slowly, that this wasn't about love. We were supposed to keep things professional. Eleanor smiled faintly. I know what we agreed upon. But sometimes, things don't work out the way we expect. I don't want to keep hiding behind the contract, Mark. I want something real. And if you don't feel the same way, that's okay. But I needed to be honest with you. The room felt still, the quiet hum of the house outside the only sound. Mark's heart pounded in his chest as he processed her words. The question that had been nagging at him for weeks finally had an answer. He could see it in Eleanor's eyes, the sincerity, the yearning for something deeper. Could this really be happening? Was he ready for it? He took a deep breath, trying to steady his racing thoughts. I don't know what to say, he admitted. This is a lot to take in. Eleanor's expression softened. I know. But whatever happens, I'm not going to push you. I just needed to tell you how I feel. Mark stared at her for a long moment, his mind filled with conflicting emotions. He had started this arrangement out of necessity, but somewhere along the way, things had changed. He didn't know if he was falling in love with her, but he couldn't deny the pull he felt every time they were together. I don't know what I'm ready for either, Mark said finally. But I'm willing to figure it out. Together, if you want. Eleanor's eyes lit up, a soft, relieved smile spreading across her face. You're willing to give this a chance? She asked, her voice filled with a mixture of hope and uncertainty. Mark nodded, his heart lifting. Yeah, I think we should. We don't have to have all the answers now, but we can see where this goes. Eleanor reached across the table, her hand resting gently on his. Thank you, Mark. For the first time since they had entered this arrangement, Mark felt like they were no longer just two people tied together by a contract. They were starting something new, something uncertain but filled with possibility. What will happen next? Will Mark and Eleanor's journey together bring them closer, or will their pasts continue to haunt them? Stay tuned to find out, and let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Days passed since Mark and Eleanor had their heart-to-heart conversation, and while things weren't magically perfect, there was a noticeable shift between them. The walls they had once built between them began to crumble, slowly but surely. Their relationship was no longer just about keeping up appearances for the world, but something that was starting to feel more real. Eleanor, the woman who had once seemed so distant and untouchable, had opened up in a way that Mark had never expected. For the first time since moving into the mansion, Mark felt like he wasn't just a tenant in her life. He was becoming a part of it. They began to spend more time together outside of business events. There were dinners where they didn't talk about work, walks in the garden, and quiet moments where they simply shared their thoughts without the pressure of their contract hanging over them. And yet, despite all the progress, Mark couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something still wasn't right. He couldn't completely let go of the fact that their relationship had started as a business deal, a deal that, while evolving, was still bound by rules and expectations. One evening, they were having dinner in Eleanor's private dining room, a space that always felt more intimate than the grand banquet halls they usually frequented. The soft light from the chandelier cast a warm glow on Eleanor's face, and for a moment, Mark couldn't help but stare at her. She was so much more than he had ever imagined. She was smart, ambitious, driven, but in this quiet moment, he saw something else: vulnerability. Mark, she began, breaking his train of thought. I've been thinking a lot about what we're doing here. I know things are still new, but I don't want us to keep dancing around the truth anymore. Mark put down his fork, his heart suddenly pounding in his chest. What do you mean? He asked, his voice uncertain. Eleanor met his gaze and smiled softly. I don't want to hide behind the contract anymore. I know we agreed it wouldn't be about love, but somewhere along the way, I started feeling something more than just business. And I can't ignore it. Mark felt his breath catch in his throat. Could this really be happening? You're saying you feel the same way? He asked, not sure if he was hearing her right. She nodded, her smile widening. I think so. But it's not just about me, Mark. It's about us. I want to see where this goes. No more pretending, no more contracts. Mark's mind was racing. He had been trying to guard himself, not letting himself get too attached, but hearing her speak so honestly made it harder to ignore what he had been feeling for some time. I don't know what I'm supposed to feel, he admitted, his voice low. I've spent so long thinking this was just a deal. But I can't deny that being with you has started to feel like more than that. I guess I've been afraid to admit it. Eleanor reached across the table, her hand gently resting on his. I understand, she said softly. I was afraid too. But maybe, just maybe, this arrangement could turn into something real. Something we both want, not just what we've settled for. Mark looked at her hand on his, the warmth of her touch comforting in a way he hadn't expected. It felt like they were stepping into uncharted territory together, and the uncertainty of it was both terrifying and exhilarating. For the first time, he felt like they were truly in this together, not just as business partners, but as two people who were beginning to understand each other on a deeper level. But as the evening wore on, and they continued to talk about their hopes and fears, Mark realized that even though things were changing between them, there were still obstacles they needed to face. The truth was, Eleanor's world was vastly different from his, and no matter how much they cared for each other, they would have to navigate those differences. And then there was the matter of their families. Would they accept their unconventional relationship? Would Eleanor's reputation as a powerful CEO be tarnished by her marriage to someone from a completely different background? As those thoughts lingered in his mind, Mark couldn't help but feel a bit overwhelmed. I don't have all the answers, he said, looking up at Eleanor. But I'm willing to take a chance on this. On us. Eleanor's eyes softened, and she squeezed his hand. That's all I'm asking for, Mark. In that moment, Mark realized that no matter where this journey would take them, they were no longer bound by the rules of a contract. They were choosing to write their own story together. Stay tuned for what happens next. Will Mark and Eleanor's growing connection face even more challenges, or will they find a way to make it work? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. As the weeks passed, Mark and Eleanor's relationship continued to evolve, but the weight of their unconventional situation began to press down on both of them. They had agreed to give this a real chance, but both of them knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Eleanor's world was filled with constant scrutiny: her business, her public image, and the expectations that came with being a powerful CEO. Mark, on the other hand, still felt like a stranger in this new life. Despite their growing closeness, the doubts lingered. It was the day of a major charity gala that Mark began to feel the full weight of their situation. Eleanor had invited him to attend as her husband, though everyone knew their relationship was still unconventional. As they stepped into the ballroom, Mark felt all eyes on them. The guests were dressed to impress, their conversations filled with the usual talk of business deals, investments, and the elite world that Eleanor navigated daily. Mark, in his well-tailored suit, felt out of place. He couldn't ignore the whispers and the curious glances directed their way. Eleanor, however, was calm as ever. Her presence seemed to dominate the room, and it became clear that she had mastered the art of playing the game. As the evening wore on, Mark couldn't help but feel like a pawn in a game he didn't fully understand. He had agreed to this, but he hadn't expected the cold reality of living in Eleanor's world. Eleanor noticed his unease and leaned closer during one of the quieter moments of the evening. "Are you all right?" she asked softly, her gaze steady. Mark hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to respond. "I don't know," he admitted, his voice barely audible. "I thought I could handle this, but it's harder than I thought. I don't fit in here, Eleanor. I feel like I'm being watched, judged." Eleanor's expression softened, and for the first time in a while, she looked at him with genuine concern. "You don't have to prove anything to anyone, Mark." "Not to me, and certainly not to them," she said, her voice reassuring. "This is our life now, and we're building it together. If you ever feel uncomfortable, we'll figure it out. But don't let them get to you." Mark met her eyes, feeling a wave of gratitude. It was the first time she had truly acknowledged his struggles, and it meant more to him than he could express. "Thanks," he whispered. "I just wish it didn't feel like we're always hiding something." Eleanor gave a small nod, her lips pressing together thoughtfully. "I know. But it's just a phase, Mark. We'll find a way to make this work, even if it's not always easy." Just then, a well-dressed woman approached them, smiling broadly. "Eleanor, darling. You're looking as radiant as ever," she exclaimed, turning her attention to Mark. "And this must be your husband, Mark. It's so lovely to finally meet you." Mark put on a smile, but the woman's overly polite tone didn't escape him. He could tell that she was trying too hard to make him feel welcome, and it made him uneasy. "It's a pleasure," he said, his voice polite but distant. Eleanor, sensing his discomfort, smoothly guided the conversation away from awkward pleasantries. As the night continued, Mark found himself retreating into the background more often, while Eleanor navigated the crowd with grace. He couldn't shake the feeling that no matter how hard he tried, he would always be a stranger in her world. When the evening finally came to a close, Mark and Eleanor retreated to the quiet of their home. The car ride was silent, and as they entered the mansion, Mark finally spoke. "I don't know if I can keep doing this," he confessed, his voice heavy with emotion. Eleanor paused, turning to face him. "What do you mean?" she asked, her tone gentle. This life," Mark said, gesturing vaguely. "I feel like I'm living in a bubble. A world that's not mine. And no matter how much we try to make it work, I'm just not sure I belong here." Eleanor stepped closer, her hand reaching for his. "Mark, you belong with me. That's all that matters." The sincerity in her voice stopped him in his tracks. For the first time in a long while, Mark felt like he wasn't just a placeholder in her life. He was starting to feel like he was truly a part of it. But the lingering doubts remained. Was it enough? Could they really overcome their differences and build something lasting? Stay tuned to find out what happens next. Will Mark and Eleanor be able to navigate the complexities of their relationship, or will their differences tear them apart? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. The days following the gala were filled with tension for Mark. While Eleanor had reassured him that he belonged with her, the insecurities he had felt in that high society world still lingered. He couldn't shake the feeling that no matter how much time passed, he would never truly fit in. Eleanor had been nothing but supportive, but Mark wasn't sure if he could continue to live in her world, where appearances seemed to mean everything. One evening, after a particularly rough day, Mark found himself wandering through the mansion's grand hallways. The silence was overwhelming, and he felt disconnected from everything Eleanor, the life they were building, even himself. It was during these moments of doubt that he wondered if he had made the right decision. He had entered this arrangement with the intention of solving his financial problems, but now that they were more than just business partners, the stakes felt higher. He had begun to care for Eleanor in ways he hadn't expected, and he realized just how much he valued her company. But the question still hung in the air: could this be enough? Could love truly grow from the foundation of a contract? As he walked past the large windows, he saw Eleanor standing outside on the balcony, staring out into the distance. The soft glow of the evening lights illuminated her face, and for a moment, Mark hesitated. He wanted to go to her, to talk about everything that had been on his mind, but he didn't know how to start. Eleanor noticed him standing in the doorway and gave him a soft smile. "Mark," she called gently, "come join me." He stepped outside, his hands tucked into his pockets as he joined her on the balcony. The cool night air felt refreshing, and for the first time in days, Mark felt at ease. Eleanor turned to him, her eyes searching his face. "You've been distant lately," she said quietly. "What's going on? You know you can talk to me." Mark looked at her, feeling a mix of guilt and frustration. "I don't know if I can do this anymore, Eleanor," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if I can keep pretending to be someone I'm not. I don't fit in with your world, and I don't know how to make it work." Eleanor took a step closer to him, her expression softening. "Mark," she said, her voice steady, "you don't have to fit in with my world. You're part of my world because I want you here. This is not about appearances. It's about us, about what we have together. And if you're still unsure, that's okay. But we don't have to rush. We can take this one step at a time." Mark felt the weight of her words sink in. Maybe he had been rushing things, trying to make sense of a relationship that didn't have clear rules. Maybe he had been so focused on the things that didn't matter, like how he looked in a room full of strangers, that he had forgotten what really mattered. The connection they had built was real, and maybe that was enough to start with. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice full of regret. "I've been so focused on all the wrong things. I think I just needed to hear you say that." Eleanor smiled, her eyes soft and understanding. "You don't have to apologize, Mark. We're both figuring this out. And it's okay to take things slow." The moment felt like a turning point. Mark realized that while their relationship had started as a business arrangement, it had the potential to become something deeper, something worth fighting for. He didn't have all the answers, and he wasn't sure where their journey would lead, but for the first time, he felt like he was ready to embrace whatever came next. As they stood together on the balcony, the soft hum of the city below seemed to fade into the background. It was just the two of them, and for that moment, everything felt right. What happens next? Will Mark and Eleanor's relationship continue to grow, or will their differences tear them apart? Stay tuned to find out, and don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments below. As the days passed after their conversation on the balcony, Mark and Eleanor grew closer, each day solidifying the bond that had started as a business arrangement but was slowly turning into something deeper. Mark had finally allowed himself to accept the reality of their relationship, understanding that it wasn't just about fitting into Eleanor's world, it was about finding a new world that they could build together, one step at a time. Eleanor, too, began to open up in ways she had never done before. She shared more about her past, her fears, and her hopes for the future. With every conversation, they learned more about each other, peeling back the layers that had once kept them apart. The walls they had built began to crumble, and trust grew where doubt once lived. It wasn't always easy, though. There were moments of uncertainty when Mark questioned if he truly belonged in Eleanor's high-powered world, but Eleanor was always there, reassuring him that their connection was real and that they were building something that was theirs, not dictated by expectations or societal norms. One afternoon, after a quiet lunch together in their private garden, Mark took Eleanor's hand in his, looking into her eyes with a new sense of clarity. "Eleanor," he said softly, "I've been thinking. We've been through so much together, and I've realized that what we have, it's real. I don't need to fit into your world, and you don't need to fit into mine. We can create something new. Something that's ours." Eleanor smiled, her eyes bright with emotion. "I agree," she said, her voice full of conviction. "We've come this far, Mark, and I know we can continue to build a life together. It's not about what people think or how things look. It's about what we feel." In that moment, Mark felt a deep sense of peace, a sense of belonging that he hadn't felt in a long time. He realized that love didn't have to follow a specific set of rules. It didn't need to be perfect. It just needed to be real, and what they had was undeniably real. As the months went by, Mark and Eleanor continued to navigate the complexities of their relationship. They faced challenges, of course there were still moments of doubt, and there were outside pressures from family and business colleagues who didn't understand their relationship. But they always faced those challenges together, supporting each other, knowing that their bond was unshakable. One evening, as they sat together in their living room, the warmth of a fire crackling in the background, Mark took a deep breath and turned to Eleanor. "I don't think I've ever told you this, but I want to be completely honest with you," he began. Eleanor looked at him, her expression soft and encouraging. "What is it, Mark?" she asked. "I never expected any of this. I never thought that we would get to this point. But now, I know I don't ever want to let you go." Eleanor's eyes widened slightly, her heart racing at his words. Mark took her hand in both of his, squeezing it gently. "I love you, Eleanor. I love you more than I ever thought possible." Eleanor's breath caught in her throat as a smile spread across her face. "I love you too, Mark. I always have." And with that, the weight of their journey together seemed to lift, replaced with a sense of joy and fulfillment. They had built something real, something that was theirs, and no outside pressure, no doubts could take that away. Their story, once founded on a contract, had transformed into something more beautiful than they could have ever imagined. It was no longer about business, appearances, or societal expectations. It was about love, trust, and the future they were building together, side by side. And so, they began their new chapter, hand in hand, with a love that had grown from an unexpected arrangement into something beautiful and lasting. What do you think of their journey? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.